Hello, everybody. Just making sure we're recording. We are. It's me, your boy, Sil the DM, coming with you with an exciting, hopefully, episode of Campaign Catchup. Uh, where a little series where hopefully I won't have too many episodes of this, where I catch everyone up on the current ons and goings of my campaigns so that we can start doing more weekly and bi-weekly videos of the campaigns when sessions happen. And today we're going to be covering The City, which is a current working title for the campaign. It's not the one we're going to keep. What's open was just going over our players really quick. Now, before that, I'm going to quickly mention this campaign has proven to be extremely volatile in terms of player composition. Several characters and players who had traveled with the group have needed to leave the game very suddenly. Or at least one player decided to change their character because they weren't really having fun or grasping the class. So if I reference characters who aren't in the players list, I'll quickly explain that and please forgive. So our party currently exists of Levi, the Yuntai cleric, Rickle, the human paladin, Half Moon at Midnight, or Midnight for short, Tabaxi rogue, Siren, an elf druid, Culvelin, a deep gnome summoner, Zon, the human monk, and Darnik, the tiefling sorcerer, some of who you can see over here in this delightful piece of art done by Zon's player. Links to Zon's player's Instagram will be in the description of the video, of course. Thank you, Coop, for the pretty art. And let's continue with a brief description and sort of a synopsis of the world-building document I sent the players. This campaign and another one of my campaigns all take place on a world that I made myself, known as Tyre, that I built. I started making it when I was 12, and I am now 28. So it's been a long time working and fiddling with this setting. So let's begin. The world at war, because war is a great, spicy time. Roughly 200 years ago, roughly the campaign is taking place about 200 years into a time that is being referred to by historians already as the Age of War, officially recognized in the imperial calendars of elves and man as the Third Age. Mass conflicts between men and elves as two burgeoning empires fight each other over control of land and resources, while the multitude races of the Thryband, which include the orcs, goblins, trolls, and kobolds, unify and attempt to carve out land for themselves in the western reaches of Krelvain. The Great Dwarf holds and gnomish cities face terrible incursions of mind flayers and drow from the Underdark, and even more unspeakable horrors. And while all these mortals war with each other across the entire planet, the gods themselves are currently engaged in mortal combat. The powerful beings clashing across the world, creating powerful reality-warping storms of magical radiation in the wake of their melees, which seem to cause random magical events, mutations, and intense damage to areas they pass by. And that's basically where we are. But through all of this, there are places of sanctuary, independent nations that attempt to keep themselves clear of wars of mortals and gods alike, and one such place is the city. It was here that our intrepid heroes, as I'm going to call them very loosely, met one another and joined together as a group. And here's where I discuss that there are some characters I'm going to reference here who aren't in the player list. One of them being Telik, an orc, a half-orc barbarian, I believe, who accidentally was using one of the Eberron dragon-marked races, which is banned content for the campaign, and that was a whole issue that had to be released, who could no longer make sessions, and another being Vernalia, a dark elf sorceress, who, after a few sessions and real-life obligations, could no longer make the campaign. So the beginning of the campaign is fairly cliche. I personally try to avoid the whole "you met in a tavern" starts, though I can be a little hypocritical about that, as you'll see in another episode of the Campaign Catch-Up. So instead, I informed the players of the rough synopsis of where they are here in the city, which is an independent nation, basically, staying out of all of the wars as much as they can. But nothing's ever quite that easy. Having been in the city for a while, the players learn that it sustains itself and stays connected to the outside world, which it is very far away from, by almost tri-monthly supply caravans from Embrum, an elven capital to the southwest, and Helsmere, the current seat of power of the human empire to the southeast. Due to a unique relationship that the mayor of the city has with these factions, they put aside their differences, send aid, mail, and other necessities north to the city. And to keep some frame of just perspective, those two cities are about a 3-month travel. So by the time their first caravan arrives in the city, they are already sending another caravan from where they are before the other caravan has even left the city, to ensure that this happens in like a decent cohesive cycle. It's a very long trek. However, neither caravan had arrived in months, and people were beginning to get fairly worried about the situation. Hearing rumors as they gathered to await one of these caravans that ended up not showing, the players heard rumors that the mayor might be willing to hire sellswords to look into the matter. And some of the players had personal reasons for wanting to get involved, such as expecting something in the caravan south, or they were just looking for some easy money while in some downtime with their normal business. So they journeyed independently of each other to the judicial building of the city, where they met the mayor's secretary, a very heavy-set but strongly built elf by the name of Sindaria. The elf secretary escorted them, after having a nice conversation with them, to the mayor, a larger-than-life man with finely tailored suit and piercing gold eyes, where at least one player, skilled in arcane connections to other planes, revealed, basically saw a glimpse through the facade that was the mayor himself, the way he concealed himself. And we have some beautiful fan art. Well, I'm not going to call it fan art. I have beautiful art that I commissioned. Fan art seems in a props. Of the mayor, link to the artist from Tumblr will be in the description beneath Zon's player character's Instagram. And here we see the mayor. Accepting the job from the mayor, this newly formed group set off for the 3-day journey south to the edge of Keltarek, the Great Wood, a primordial forest of thick trees, some as thick as homes that rise up in some places to be over a mile tall. Littered with creatures and beings of an ancient time, it is a natural barrier that separates the far north of the continent from all of the southern realms, for as long as anyone has remembered. Along the way, they were harassed by a playful group of grass mites, fey elemental creatures that like to play harmless pranks on passerbys, until they go too far and their marks become violent, and start succeeding at least. Surviving their encounter with the harmless elementals, barely, the group trekked up the twin mountain peaks, following the road up a quarter-mile to a plateau that connects two mountains that are just south of the city. During the night, they became waylaid by a small group of crazed Pesh miners and their pebble elemental familiars. Having taken some pretty devastating blows from their heavy picks, after they dispatched the threat and looted some gems from the little gnome's loins, the group head off in the night, wanting to distance themselves from the area of battle that they had found themselves in, only to find themselves waylaid by a group of highwaymen, surrounded on all sides from goblins on perches up high in the mountain, far out of melee reach, and in the dim light, pretty hard to target with spells, but the sound of their bowstrings echoed out. And then a man came out to speak with them. An Earth Genasi named Paddock Griff. We have art of Paddock Griff as well. Thank you, Total Art Freak, on DeviantArt for this. Again, a link to their DeviantArt page will be down in the description. This is Paddock Griff, a Earth Genasi highwayman. After a brief discussion, the party found themselves bereft of most of the gems they had just taken off of the dead gnomes, due to not wanting to die in a fight against superior numbers who had the advantage on them. So begrudgingly, they gave up their money. However, Paddock gave his word that they would experience safe passage through his mountain, which, for the next day, they did. Now down the mountains, the group set off into the massive forest, eventually finding a heavy swath of destruction and destroyed elven caravan from Embrum. Massive trees crushed to the ground, wagons flattened like pancakes. It was a pretty brutal mess, to say the least. As the group collected what supplies remained unspoiled, which was the main point of their job, Vernalia, the Dark Elf sorceress, had a bit of an episode of PTSD when inspecting one of the elven corpses. Imagining herself in a different time, in a different place, while her house was under attack and her family was not having a good time. She lost control of her body and released a very powerful spell at one of the elven corpses, which blew open his chest. I'm pretty sure she just blasted a corpse with a witch bolt, like, right in the bread basket, as she basically slipped into a PTSD episode, before she being suppressed by the other members of the party until she calmed down. However, this revealed that the elf had something sewn into his body inside. A quick inspection revealed that some of his intestinal tract had been removed, and that inside was a large, hefty bag of holding, it looked like. Drawn to the bag and extremely curious, one of them decided to open it, and punch it inside out, as it were. This released a hail of arrows that not only hit a nearby tree, but exploded it. A magical sword that crashed to the ground, a suit of turquoise armor that, as it landed, exploded like a flashbang grenade, blinding most of the party. After which, the few who could see, I think maybe even only one of them passed the save for the flashbang, 4 winged unicorns flew out of the bag, followed by a dark shadow that changed the very level of light in the sky, echoing maniacally that it was free at last. Now, we don't have enough time to unpack all of that right now, so they moved on, sealing up the bag, noticing that the arrows had all returned to the bag. They moved on, discovering that it looked like someone or whatever caused the destruction might have dragged potential survivors away. They decided to follow the blood trail, knowing that the mayor would pay them much more handsomely if they returned with survivors. Drawn by this track through the woods, they came to a small creek, a small stream running through the forest, and a wounded and dying ankylosaur. The group poured a bit of healing into the creature to make it as comfortable as possible, and discovered that across the creek from it, it leaving them for the most part alone, I'm pretty sure it accidentally cracked one of them in the chest. Or did they fight it? You know what? I'm pretty sure they fought it. They elected not to waste healing on it and fought it. Because I'm like 90% sure that Rickle got crashed in the chest and was floating downriver, face in the water, like dying. Yeah, we're gonna say they killed that. My memory of this was 6 or 7 months ago, when I first started these campaigns, so my memory is a little vague, and my notes are of how they handled my encounters are basically non-existent, so please, my apologies. Across the river from the ankylosaur, what I do know is that there is a temple. This Aztec-looking temple that rises up out of the ground with stairs leading up to a flat level on top. And with all the noise they had made fighting the ankylosaur, they seemed to have woken someone up. a tiefling named Bagaya, who was traveling with the elven caravan. Having survived the stampede that had crushed the caravan proper, when Bagaya awoke and realized that several of the friends that they had made in the caravan were dead, but several were missing. They decided to follow the trail of blood as well to see if they could find survivors, but ended up collapsing at the temple during the night, being quite tired. As it were, the party was looking a little beat up themselves, and were interested in quickly checking out the temple and getting a little bit of rest. Inside, they discovered a large rug that, when tampered with, released a pulse of necromantic energy that began summoning several weak and not too strong zombies. As the zombies were dealt with, the group discovered that beneath the rug were a series of, I believe it was 5 or 6 dials, which had multiple different words written on them in Celestial, which made some members of the party extremely intrigued. While exploring a lower level of the temple, only available through a collapsed floor and a rope they set up, the party discovered 2 idols to 2 different gods. One, which was known as Umbenkarno, a child god of knowledge and curiosity. By tinkering with the dials, they discovered that it would light candles on these statues, and piecing together the puzzle slowly, they revealed a passage that, once the dials clicked and someone read the passage out loud, created an opening in the center of the temple, a magical funnel of slow falling down to a room below, and a set of fairly small and not very safe stairs spiraling down to a large chamber which made up the bulk of the lower level of the temple, which was completely inaccessible from any other way. Inside, they found very clearly spots where weapons and armor would have been stored, several large chairs and regular-sized chairs, including one comically small chair, a hefty collection of documents that seemed to have been sealed treaties and peace talks and armistices and basically declarations of a promise for aid, just saying that, in a time of crisis, these 2 forces will put aside differences and unite armies for the greater good, stuff like that, that were all seemed to have been signified by someone named Darcel. And all of these were written in Elven, Undercommon, and Celestial. And the Dark Elf player, Vernalia, noticed their family's insignia, their noble house's insignia on some of the letters, which was very intriguing to them. Beyond that, the group found a blue-tinted winged dagger, a magical artifact that would allow its wielder to cast Gust and Featherfall a few times per day, and was just a fancy magical blade. Beyond that, they also discovered a small black ring, which had this beautiful white gemstone and the symbol of infinity, and it was engraved to say, "For you, darling, when a moment of silence is all you desire." They discovered that the ring, when worn, would create a powerful 20-foot radius orb of silence around the wearer. While dealing all of this, they traveled along, following the signs, wanting to find survivors, picking up the new tiefling Bagaya with them. It led to a clearing where they ended up getting surrounded by raptors, dinosaurs, and one large matronly brood mother. And during the intense fight, they experienced a god storm. Through a mix of their own ingenuity and positioning and some good luck with the god storm, they managed to survive the encounter, but they were very wounded. Discovering that any of the survivors that the raptors might have pulled away alive were dead, the group, disappointed in that fact, prepared to travel back, at least to the temple, to rest, when they were suddenly ambushed by a party of Yuntai rangers, getting poisoned and put to sleep. The group drifted away, waking up, for the most part, chained by their arms and feet in this weird dark room with big drains and thick green sludge running throughout it. Noticing specifically that Levy was not with the group. And out of the center of the room rose an egg. The egg hatched, revealing a newborn green dragon, who was looking quite hungry after the energy it took to hatch from its egg. At this point, the players, for the most part, managed to break themselves free and were combating the dragon, who even at a newborn level was dealing immense damage with its breath weapon and had very sharp claws. They did manage to kill the whelp, and were struggling to find a way to open the building, or the door, to this cell they were in, when it opened from the other side. Levy was there. Levy was actually from a nearby village of tieflings, which was connected to this temple they were in. But Levy, not enjoying her people's predication to acts of great evil and cruelty, used the excuse of going out to spy as a way to run away. When they noticed her coming back into the woods closer to their temple with a group of unsuspecting travelers, they took that to mean that she had lured them in to be sacrifices at the temple. Levy, horrified that her friends were about to be sacrificed, stole the priest who was congratulating her's dagger and killed him in the privacy of his office, stealing his keys and running to rescue her friends. Using the Ring of Silence, the group crept through the temple, avoiding everyone else, the sleeping Yuntai, as night had fallen outside, eventually finding their way into a beautiful open area where a waterfall was crashing down from above, forming a lake that spilled off into a marshy area to the side, rolling green hills, thick gardens and bushes, and several trees were growing in this clearing inside the temple, which was actually sort of the warped bodies of 3 of those god trees. And it was here they met the dragon's mother, an elder green dragon. After a brief conversation, they learned the dragon to be quite lethargic, and if anything, annoyed with the snake people for constantly taking her young and trying to feed them this way. It caused a bit of a clash between her and Vernalia, who was a dragon-blooded sorcerer and considered herself very kin to dragons. And the fact that the dragon wasn't killing them for killing her baby annoyed Vernalia. She seemed too lethargic. However, the dragon seemed more than fine with just letting them leave, because there was enough blood here already. So they did, though the party was basically Dragon Vernalia, who was trying to attack the dragon. Later, they crashed down to rest, exhausted at the temple, except for Vernalia, who found herself possessed momentarily by Lilith, the drow goddess in my setting, who walked her back to the Elder Dragon, and she learned that the dragon's name was Yggdrasira. And Lilith basically had a message for the dragon. Leave now, the forest is not safe. Eventually, the group woke up, and Vernalia was there, and everything was fine, though she remembered what had happened and talked to the group about how weird it was. But with a new bag of holding and a way to store all the crates that they had found, which they left with some donkeys. Forgot they had a wagon and donkeys during this whole adventure, which they left at the road overnight, and thankfully wasn't maimed or attacked. They headed back to the city, where the mayor learned of not only their bag of holding, which they discovered was his, and had been used to trap the soul of a powerful fiend. The fiend would not be able to return to full power, they learned, basically because of the mayor's position. He was preventing that from happening. But things were a lot more dangerous, and he was very concerned that someone was trying to smuggle it into the city. At this time, they also learned of a nearby independent nation, Wharf, a coastal city about a month's travel away. And that the king of Wharf, men whose name they would learn later, had a deal with the city that his kingdom would basically be an emergency bunker for the citizens of the city, which had over 50,000 people living in it. In times of crisis, as long as the city continued to provide Worf with medical support. Worf, being an independent nation and refusing to align itself with any empire, found trade with the other empires difficult. The mayor would use his prestige to acquire the medicine required for the king's mother, who was quite ill. Before heading out to go to Worf to deliver the medicine that they were able to recover, they met with a criminal underboss of the city, a halfling named Ohm, his bodyguard, an elf named Whisper, and one of his doorboys, an ogre who wears a tight suit named Bob. Ohm informed them that they would be introduced to one of his companions in Worf, who had a package for him. They were to pick up that package and return it to him if they knew what was good for them, basically. And along the way, they stopped by a mansion hidden in the mountains that they had learned about during the Godstorm. One of them had received a vision seeing this mansion. Inside, they discovered a terribly sad tale of love and betrayal. An elf noblewoman who had abandoned her family to live in the mountains with her half-elf lover, who's fallen quite ill after the death of her children. How desperately her maids and butler were attempting to cure her sickness through different means, including a lot of specially grown marijuana, and how one of the handmaidens was the one actually causing the illness, torn by jealousy that the elf noble had stolen her half-elf obsession away from her, having grown up with the lady's husband. When the husband returned, believing he had finally found a cure, he became possessed by something and struck down his very sickly wife, the act of which caused her to transform into a banshee. And somehow, during killing her husband, something happened to weaken her body, and the help were able to lock her in the room and abandon the place. Except for the elf maid who had done all this, who killed herself in the secret room where she was performing infernal rites. After slaying the banshee, the group found several magic items, a necklace that would allow the wearer to appear like an elf while worn, and actually gave the bearer some of the elven attributes, like immunity to magical sleep and a few other small things. But they also found a dagger trapped in the body, a black blade with cool jade, which Midnight took, and discovered that it was sentient, and that the blade's name was Reichi-ji. Pushing on from here, though, after being rested from their fight with the Banshee and wanting to just get the fuck away from this place, the group headed back on their course. And after several weeks of travel and voting most possible interactions, not allowing themselves to get sidetracked is a kinder way to say it, the group met an eccentric dwarf named Solomon, who was currently flying by with his flock of griffins. He apparently had discovered a wounded human in the woods, heading towards Worf based on a bounty sheet that they had on their person, as well as the head of a winter wolf. This human, they would learn, was Zahn, the human monk, and one of our players, who had taken on a bounty with some of their friends from the city to deal with the wolves to get rich quick. Unfortunately, both of Zahn's friends had died in the fight, with Zahn managing to kill the winter wolf, but barely able to survive fleeing the rest of the wolf pack. Collapsing in the forest, and probably would have died on their own had Solomon not spotted them. Now, taking Zahn, who had been resting unconscious with Solomon, the party were a little less gentle with the human, discovering a weird shimmer in a nearby hill that turned to be a natural portal to another plane of existence. they kind of rather roughly threw Zahn out of the bed and into the frying pan. After Rickle broke his nose and I believe dislocated his shoulder diving into the interdimensional hole. Inside, they fought a fair amount of skeletons and did a little looting. And when they discovered an undead hill giant, they ran away. But before they could successfully get out of the portal, the giant seemed to have awoken something else. An elephant-headed craster with long robes of dark black and purple, dotted with elephant heads. They did manage to defeat the creature, though the fight was quite intense for most of them. Bagaya actually doing quite a bit of work with their rapier throughout the course of the fight. Having killed the creature and not wanting to stay here anymore in this place that was sapping them of their strength, had ruined their rations, and was making them lethargic, they just got the fuck out of Dodge. Climbed their way out of the hole, leaving whatever else might have been there to loot, including the body of the thing they killed, behind. They arrived at Wharf about a week later, late at night, and the guards, learning who they were, began rushing them through the city, taking back alleys and back streets, very tight spaces in a very roundabout way, to try and ensure that they wouldn't get meddled with by people who might want to intercept the order of medicine that was to be delivered to the king. Which, of course, totally got them ambushed and knocked unconscious by a very powerful gas, which several of them resisted and had to get put down the hard way through non-lethal weapon attacks and crossbow shots. Think of it like beanbag crossbows. It hurt. Like a bitch. Awakening later, they found themselves in the home of a dwarf by the name of Dottie Ironbrand, and being loomed over by an ogre-looking bodyguard of his. Though the creature looked like it could possibly be aquatic, they didn't ask, I don't think, so you don't get to know. Dottie apologized for roughing them up and explained the situation of Wharf, how the coastal city was suffering due to the king's unpredictability, with his obsession of his mother and her illness, threatening his potential ties to the city over her illness and the city's inability to get the medicine due to the caravans never showing up. And none of the doctors in Wharf were skilled enough to recreate the medicine. And it was basically creating this situation where Axel, the king, they discovered his name at this point was Axel Royce, was become unhinged and extremely paranoid and just kind of stopped being a good king whenever his mother's illness would flare and they did not have the proper medicine. Through some skilled insight checks and some rather pertinent questions, they discovered that Dottie had known Axel's mother since she was a little girl and had been the king of the head of the coin, basically the master of the mint, I believe is his exact title, in Wharf for over 100 years now, and that he had been there raising alongside Marcia and Axel. They also learned that Marcia was Axel's mother's name. And that he viewed both of them as family. And he personally seemed to believe that he was the reason Axel wouldn't let go of his mother. That he had somehow instilled this belief that family matters above all else in Axel through their interactions while Axel was growing up, and that he was the cause of the problem, basically. And he wanted to fix it. So he was offering the players a hefty sum of gold in exchange for the medicine they carried, which he would replace with a non-toxic, non-poisonous painkiller that would relax Marcia's body, but inevitably allow her sickness to kill her, since she would no longer be receiving actual medicine. After debating this, the party agreed. They sold their medicine, divided their coin, and took the painkiller to kill the king's wife, or king's mother, sorry. Words. After meeting the unstable king Axel, in Castle Rose, this beautiful keep with rose-shaped parapets and beautiful stained glass windows, he quickly dismissed them, just wanting to be alone with his mother. seeming to stabilize quite a bit when her body seemed to relax. There was also a moment, not here in my notes, when they got with the mother. Reichel, when they got into the mother's room, Reichel tried to go to the bed and interact with her, and she drew a sword on him that was in the bed with her and hit him hard. He was ready to just kill her himself if they didn't hold him back, which probably would have gotten the party instantly killed by Axel and his cohorts and the guard. So probably a good idea that didn't happen. As they were being escorted out, they met a red-haired elf in a garish robe with vibrant, moving tattoos and a false eye that seemed to be painted with magical runes. Velaz Balrose, a powerful elven entrepreneur who was the city's only supplier of wood that they would learn later. He offered them to stay at his place for the night, his mansion, basically. At the cost of some conversation, basically. And the conversation was good. He exposited a lot about the city, the state of affairs, and learned about their travels and how the city is proper, not Worf. During which Zahn became a little smitten, and they went upstairs together, though Zahn was a little tipsy, to discuss some scrolls Balrose had said he had from an elvish monastery. And we have here a beautifully drawn portrait of Velaz. Thank you again, Zahn's player. It's awesome. Also, during the night, Rickle almost killed Levy using one of the magical arrows from the bag of holding. He decided to once again punch the bag inside out, which ended up hitting both of them with arrows, but unfortunately one of them exploded on Levy. They had discovered that the arrows were some sort of god-touched artifact that randomly would roll a different species type when they hit a target, and if it matched the target they were hitting, they had a chance to explode for over 50 damage, which at this point I believe they were like level 3, probably would have killed Levy and should have killed Levy. But I normally give my parties a "you fucked up and I'm going to spare you once" rule. Because sometimes, especially at lower levels, someone does something or just makes a bad mistake, or sometimes dice just happen and they would die. And it's not fun to have a character die that early in a campaign, in my opinion. So instead, I allowed Levy to live, but I very sternly informed the party that the next time one of them dies, I'm not fudging the numbers for them. They'll be dead, and I'll be laughing. Well, let's continue. Bagaya, at this point, abandons the group. His bag's full of coin. The next day, they wake and they're gone. Bagaya's player just wasn't feeling the Bard class or Bagaya's 4 intelligence score. So they decided that they'd wanted to switch, which is something I allow but try to keep as limited as possible. The next day, the group met with the contact of Ohm, who showed up to shout down a Sahagwin bully by the name of Mako, who was terrorizing some of the captains at the docks. Their contact was a trading woman named Ziggleplex. They followed her to her home underwater in a Triton community just off the coast of Worf, thanks to some powerful magical amulets, and were treated to lunch. Extremely fresh fish prepared by her Kuatoa cook named Carter, who talks like this. And he was great, and they loved him. She had an amulet they wanted them to deliver to Ohm. Gave them a meal and indulged in their company until they were ready to leave. She also introduced them to Darnik, a tiefling sorcerer who would replace Bagaya in the group. A sellsword who was ready to move to greener pastures. This is some fine art of Ziggleplex that we have from Total Art Freak on DeviantArt. We saw them earlier with our paddock piece. Returning to the surface, Reichel, after asking a handicapped, dislimbed fisherman who was busy working on some nets at the pier about some shops, decided to just mock the man for being crippled, for basically no reason after he'd helpfully instructed the party where they could go for the questions they were asking. Uh, I don't know why. Reichel's just kind of a cunt. The party spent some of their ill-gotten euthanasia money. Reichel upgraded his armor to plate mail, and Midnight purchased some drow-ish materials that he could get woven into very good armor later, as well as some quivers to house the magical arrows, which he was basically using at that point. Suited up, they headed out to the city as fast as they could to try and avoid the oncoming winter. They managed to run away from some T-Rexes. There's been several T-Rexes on the channel this week. It probably won't stick for that long, I assure you. As well as some pretty turbulent weather and tornadoes. Getting back to the city just as winter was beginning to happen. Once they delivered their package to Ohm, they went to the mayor, clarifying that they had done the job. They were sort of talking to the mayor, who again knew about the bag of holding, and they wanted to talk more about that, and learning that someone had tried to smuggle something into the city. And through this whole conversation, they were also bringing up the temple they had found in the jungle, in the forest. Sorry, which they were kind of concerned about causing the troubles and with the spirit, and the mayor was trying to ease their concerns, basically. That though there would be trouble, it probably wouldn't be anything they could handle. Until Reichel, refusing to let anyone else interrupt him, as the mayor was trying to do, spoke the word Darcel, which they learned was the mayor's name. And the fact that the mayor is known as the mayor and the city is known as the city is that in order to keep the spirit of the archfiend away from his body, which was imprisoned under the city, the mayor used powerful old divine magic, sacrificing his name and the name of the location they were on as spell components for a barrier that could keep the spirit at bay. If someone spoke the name of either of those two things, the mayor or the city, within the boundaries of the barrier, it would undo the spell. Reichel, who would not let anyone stop him, even though they were actively trying to talk over him and tell him to stop, went on and said it anyways, because he didn't know any better, effectively potentially dooming 50,000 people to die, plus, who knows, basically putting the city into panic mode. The mayor began constructing emergency plans and rallying the city council to him. Ohm arriving with Grulak Thren, an orc blacksmith. They quickly met other members of the city, the gnome wizard Kizengulp, who was the master of sorcery for the city, an elven noblewoman, Shirise, this pale woman who is the mistress of the dead and tends to the crypts of the city. They met a lot of people very quickly here. It was at this point that Midnight's dagger, with his consent, possessed him. Reichiji spoke to the group, including the mayor, and explained that he became trapped in the Blague through a failed ritual, one that could be recreated to trap any spirit into a weapon, in theory, and that they could trap the spirit of the fiend as well, but they would need a weapon strong enough to contain it, basically. Grulak said he could make the weapon, but that his stores were low with the coming winter, which is kind of the low season for him as a blacksmith. He kind of just rides on his profits he's made over the course of the year, just because of how difficult it is to get material where they are. The group, feeling guilty and responsible for the issues, since they allowed Reichel to cause the problem, for the most part, agreed that they could travel north to the Mountain of Feln, get in there, find some adamantine, come back, and try and get this whole mess fixed. They had enough time to say goodbye to Zahn's mother and brother. Zahn gave them some of the money that they had earned from the ill-gotten euthanasia money or the bounty money. I don't remember what Zahn divided that up. And then they went to visit Ulm, where they met Thodrick, a dwarven miner who is a bit of a specialist. They would escort Thodrick to the raw materials, and he would deliver the goods. Along the way, they met the elf Siren, who caught sight of them sneaking into an abandoned mine entrance in the mountain Feln. Siren lives in the woods around the mountain, at the graces of the dwarves that live inside, and didn't want to get kicked out of his home if they somehow managed to piss the dwarves off and he somehow became implicit in it. So he decided to sneak along with them and make sure that they didn't fuck shit up for him. Along the way, they ended up fighting some oozes, dire bears, fiendish dire weasels. They met the deep-known Kovalin, who decided to journey with them, having been on her way to the surface and finding these strangers very interesting and foreign to her. They also found some powerful magical items, with Darnik acquiring a very fancy-looking dagger, but losing some of the magical arrows. Also, along the way, Zahn had noticed that the scar along his body was beginning to grow rather rapidly, and Levi, using their divine power to try and discern its nature, didn't really work that well. They ended up fighting a basilisk whose egg they had stolen, and surviving the fight, barely, though two of them were turned to stone. They met the commander of a small Dwargar city, Dark Elves, who taught them how to unpetrify their friends using basilisk blood. And after becoming quite smitten with Levi, who had recently, upon leveling up, learned Undercommon, were treated to a bit of food and a spot of rest in the Dwargar city before being escorted away. There, they ended up fighting on a lower level of the mountain a raging salamander, and came across a small summoning circle or shrine used by deep gnomes to conjure earth elementals. It was shortly after this they met a Caboosian lady, which is spelt wrong in my notes, actually, the fuck me, a insectoid race in my setting. And the woman they met was named Kagwa Nguyen. Thodrick knew her and had some acquaintance with her from when he lived with his family. They sort of discovered that Thodrick was a noble during this. She was on her way back after collecting some herbs for her village and had noticed a rare scent that was intriguing her. Thodrick discovered a hidden crate of Feln's blood, spice wine made by monks at the top of the mountain, roughly about 100 years old. And the group, Monis Rickle, who, after not getting lucky with the bug lady, decided to pout and go to sleep, drank some booze and got pretty fucked up. Levi, Zahn, and Thodrick stayed up a bit longer and enjoyed some deep conversation, which is the art you'll see on the right side, is the party sort of hanging out with their basilisk egg and enjoying some of the fine wine they had. And this is a beautiful sketch of Kagwa by Zahn's character, or Zahn's player. Words, my guys. After their sleep, though, they parted ways and headed on, discovering a pair of trolls who were bickering and play fighting. Not wanting to come to blows and wanting to avoid future bloodshed, Levi, who could speak giant, bartered, gotta miss that R there, bartered with the beasts, giving them their weasel hides that they had acquired earlier, if they just let them pass by. The trolls allowed it. They were intrigued and wanted the hides and let them go. They passed a nearby city, not wanting to get any closer to it, fearing a less comfortable encounter than what they had with the Dark Dwarves, as well as a group of goblins, over 200 strong, that definitely looked like slaves, currently going through some sort of religious rite, praying to an idol that they couldn't see. Past that, they discovered a Gorgothian mining crew. Massive creatures, sort of a crossbreed between orcs and trolls, with slight regenerative capabilities and more brute strength than orcs. But, ever diplomatic, Levi managed to negotiate safe passage in exchange for the winged dagger they had found in the temple in the forest. trading it to the wizard who was clearly in control of the mining party. Pushing past that, with safe passage, they found some raw adamantium. Thodrick, equipping powerful enchanted mining gear, began to work tirelessly for hours. And while Thodrick was doing that, the group ended up discovering a potential way out of the cave system, an old lift system used by the dwarves. After a lot of tomfoolery and Siren almost dying due to fall damage, the group managed to get the lift down and ready to be used. Thodrick completing days of work in only 8 hours, causing himself to become fairly exhausted. The group rode for about 5 or 6 hours in the shaft to get up and out of the mountain, where they could view the city, surrounded by a large army of dark figures, orcs possibly, it was hard to tell, and a looming winged figure of the Archfiend, as large as a mountain, bashing itself impudently against what appeared to have been a barrier summoned by the mayor. Rushing back to the secret passage of Ohms that they had used several times now with the city to avoid getting caught by the army of orcs and dark elves and other nasties, they met up with Whisper, who looked slightly miffed, like he had been through the worst of a few fights. He summoned a companion from a figurine of power, a hound archon named Ulster. Giving Ulster the adamantine, Ulster went to deliver it to Grulak, and the group went to meet Ohm, who instructed them to get to the mayor's at the judicial building, figure out what's best for them to do. He was busy. There, the group met Darling, a pixie, who refers to the mayor as Darling as well, and who they had met earlier briefly, that the mayor also refers to as Darling. He instructed them to go to Shersay, the grave lady at the crypts. There they could activate a scroll which would burst through the city's defenses. And then he instructed them to make their way to Krulak's Forge to defend it against potential assaults. Once there, they found the pale-skinned, mute, red-headed woman and many dead attackers who had apparently tried to assault the crypt. Learning of their intent, she escorted them to a secret tomb under one of the bridge walkways that passed over Feln's Tear, the river that feeds the city. There, Kovalin read the scroll and awoken 7 powerful guardians, 2 Maruts, 4 Zelakoots, and 1 Kolyarut. Once online, the mechanical inevitables left to protect as much of the city as possible, following Kovalin's instructions. From there, the group began to make their way to the Forge in order to protect it from further assaults, and that's where we left off. Our next session will be today, October 24th. I'm hoping to have this video up before that. If not, hopefully the recap of the session will be up sometime over the weekend if I have the time to record. I hope people enjoyed this, and I hope they like this format. Even following the script, I still stumbled over my words a little bit, but I like this. It lets me have the art there and move at a more fun pace. And I think if I'm doing a recap and not 8 months worth of gameplay all at once, I think this format could be something we stick with. I think it could be something a lot better if I'm not doing all of that nonsense. I want to thank everyone for coming by. If you have any questions, comments, ideas for future formats, please hit me up below, and yeah, I appreciate it. Still out.